opening keynote is with John Trenchard. He is Vice President Commercial and Supply Chain UK at DP World. Our subject is sustainable logistics isn't just good for the planet, it drives profitability and resilience. A warm welcome for John, please.
Hi there, morning everyone, and thank you very much for the introduction, and it's great to be here at Procurement and Supply Chain live. So my name's John, and I'm responsible for commercial and supply chain for DP World in the UK for our ports and terminals business. So if any of you guys in your supply chain are importing anything which doesn't come air freight, we are your Scope 3 emissions. So we're probably part of the problem, and hopefully we can be part of the solution as well in terms of addressing some of the decarbonisation elements of your supply chain. So we operate 2 deep water ports in the UK. This is a picture of London Gateway together with a logistics park. And we operate Southampton as well. And between the 2 of them, we are approximately half of all the container imports coming into and exports going out of the UK. So important for the UK supply chain. So sustainability is this very, very big topic, and we have a sustainability strategy called Our World, Our Future, which covers a very comprehensive range of activities and strategies as we're touching society across over 70 countries that we're operating around the world. We use this not just in our port facilities, but in our contract logistics locations, and our locations where we're getting more involved in forwarding and transport as well. But today, we are going to zoom in on decarbonisation and tuning the CO2 dial down on some of the supply chain choices that we've got. So I'm not a supply chain professional. I'm not trained in ESG. I'm not doing all of the reporting and sustainability internally. But we are talking about decarbonisation with our customers because it is a problem that our customers are dealing with on a daily basis, on a strategic basis, increasingly important basis, in order to comply with doing the right thing, dealing with what our customers want, and also dealing with this huge wave of regulation. Some of it is being fine-tuned as we're talking even today about how that's coming, but this is on people's agendas. So I'm now starting to brand myself as, hi, my name's John, and I'm a commercial tree hugger. But you know, this is something that we've got to work on a little bit, and I've got to ditch the tie and become a little bit more hipster. So just in terms of context, what have we got here? Well, back in 2023, global CO2 emissions for the entire economy was about 59 billion tonnes of CO2. So this actually goes up, I think, to halfway up the 5th floor if we were to actually put this in the right scale, this slide here. If you take international supply chains and logistics emissions, they're between 10 and 12% of total emissions across the supply chain. And that's including shipping, transport, warehousing, contract logistics, final mile delivery, some of the reverse logistics we're talking about as well. So around about 12%, 11-12% of total emissions. Maritime container shipping, or maritime shipping, is about 2 to 3% of global emissions. And as I said, the rest of the logistics industry is approximately that 8 to 9% of emissions. Now, as a port, we're a very tiny part of that. Yes, it's important that we clear up our act and we make sure that we're trying to address our emissions, our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions from our operational emissions. But we have a strategic position in the supply chain here where we have influence over the shipping lines and the ships and the efficiency of the ships, and also an efficiency over some of the decisions and choices which are in place for supply chains on the land side, connecting to distribution networks and eventually to retailers and consumers. So many customers that we're talking to about the challenges in their Scope 3 emissions have a kind of profile which looks a little bit like this. There's generally a baseline year where we've spent a lot of time measuring our supply chain emissions, and we've come up with a baseline year somewhere between 2015 and 2020 where we got a pile of emissions, and that's our baseline that we're working on. We've then got a net zero ambition, either in 2050 or 2040 for most organisations which are in the room, which is down here. Now, we don't have the luxury of very much time now because we begin to eat into this. There's usually an intermediate target which has been set by organisations. Usually that looks something like a 2030 emissions target, which is round about 50% of what the baseline was. Now, this comes to the crux of it. In 2024, a lot of people's supply chain or emissions would generally look like a lot of progress happening in Scope 1 and Scope 2. Working very hard to look at your operations, what's happening internally, what are we doing about electricity, what are we doing about our inputs for the business which is sat on our assets that we're dealing with. But generally, there's limited approach on Scope 3. Lots of ambitions, but it's a difficult thing to address. Once we get into 2030, that's not far away. Decisions that we're making now are going to affect those asset replacement requirements and various things for 2030. Generally, for Scope 1 and 2, there is a clear roadmap and there's good stuff going through because it's in our control. But Scope 3 becomes more difficult. There's an emerging path towards how to do this, but it's a bit uncertain. So in order to achieve those 50% savings, we'll require really significant Scope 3 approaches. And to get to net zero, wow, that needs some real industry collaboration and cross-industry and industry sectors collaboration to get this done. As I said at the start, we are your Scope 3 emissions for many of your supply chains. So we are part of the problem and hopefully we can be part of the solution. But we have some good news because the world is moving on. We are not where we were 20 years ago. And UK consumers are increasingly prepared to pay a little bit more to make sustainability choices. Or at least that's what the data's showing in terms of some of the feedback from various reports and surveys. So a recent one which came from YouGov in 2024, I think this came out in November, apparently 64% of British consumers are willing to pay up to 10% more for sustainably packaged food and drinks. And once more, what's interesting in this is we're not one homogeneous population either. Almost 90% of UK millennials are prepared to pay more for sustainability, according to a recent PwC survey as well. So there's differences amongst the consumers which are around. However, sustainability or lower carbon options, they're beginning to emerge. We're beginning to get electric vehicles, EVs. We're beginning to think about, low carbon fertilizer. We're beginning to think about concrete. We're beginning to think about lower transport carbon choices. But they often come with a green premium. And these solutions are emerging. So the challenge for all of us across the supply chain and across the economy is a commercial one. It's a challenge and an opportunity. So how do we offer customers lower carbon, more sustainable options at an acceptable cost recovery strategy? Because we need to be able to make sustainability, environmentally sustainability, economically sustainable. These two things are not mutually exclusive. They can happen together. And it's an opportunity for us as supply chain partners to many of you guys to have conversations about some of those choices. And we have to be pragmatic. And there are enough people around the supply chain now who are prepared to have those discussions. So at DP World, we're in a very a position of high responsibility because we have connections with lots and lots of players in the supply chain. We've got beneficial cargo owners, the people that own the cargo. We've got rail operators, truck operators, we've got forwarders, customs agents, and the shipping lines. And this position gives us the opportunity to explore ways of offering lower carbon solutions across, between, and among the players in this kind of economic community, which are your suppliers in the supply chain. So I've tried to give an example of some of the things that we're exploring and trialing across the business today. And this is a general import cycle. This is ships coming in, maybe from Asia, maybe from South America or Africa. They come in, they discharge at Southampton London Gateway, they go into our import stack, they go onto a truck or a train, and they go out and they go into your regional distribution centres and eventually potentially consumed somewhere. So in terms of carbon reporting, Scope 1 and 2, this is what's happening with the shipping lines where they're marine fuel, their heavy fuel oil, and various other choices where they're looking at ammonia or methanol or various other propulsion, LNG. For us as DP World, we're operating the port. These are our Scope 1 and 2 emissions. And the trucking companies and logistics partners that you have dealing with UK distribution, this is their Scope 1 and 2. But for cargo owners and the people who actually have the ownership of the goods, this is all Scope 3 emissions across the supply chain. So, as we said, the first thing we need to do is address our own operations. So we're addressing this part of the chain by looking at sustainable options for our operational emissions. This is the Port of Southampton. This is the container terminal there. We've got services going to something like 60-odd ports around the world, providing access to the world economy. And this is basically the physical internet. We stopped burning dinosaurs in our operations here in 2022. We've invested in hybrid equipment. We're looking at electrification. And we missed out on achieving operational net zero in 2024 by about 2 to 3% from our baseline year. In 2025, I can't say it yet officially, but I hope to have some good news later in the year in terms of progress that we've made. But an import container coming into this port back in 2015 and the evacuation of it would have cost about 55 kilos of CO2. We're now down to less than 1 kilo. So it's possible, and these are your emissions. This is London Gateway. London Gateway is just about 22 miles that way, I think, I'm sure, towards the entrance of the Thames. It's a major investment. It's a £3 billion investment in the UK economy from DP World, and it's electrified. So we've got the ability to handle the world's biggest ships here, which means the most efficient access for our economy and the most efficient in terms of tons covered per gram of CO2. And we have options to do electricity. The issue that we've got here is that we are struggling with power supply, and we're using a gas-fired power station next door, and we need to get ourselves off of that. So we're working on ways of doing that. It's a challenge, but it's something to do. We have also got options then for people interacting with our supply chain on the land side. So back in September 2023, we launched a modal shift program where we invited customers to start thinking about how you could use rail, a lower carbon option, instead of road or with road. So a delivery to Birmingham from Southampton is about 550 kilos of CO2 by truck. If you do it by train and truck, it's about 300 kilos. It's a quarter of a ton less. In 2020, at the start of 2023, 21% of cargo went by rail from Southampton. We've managed to make a difference with this modal shift scheme, and the impact is quite big. How it works is we charge £10 for every import-laden box that comes over the quay at Southampton. And if your box goes by rail within 140 miles of the port, we automatically credit that import with a £70 incentive. And this is not a supply-side measure, this is a demand-side measure to see, can we actually drive change? And here are the results. Last month, we've achieved our 100,000th container, incremental, which has moved by rail since the launch of the programme. That's taken 25,000 tonnes of CO2 off of the UK roads. And if you take that into consideration to what we're actually producing on the port, this is more than 10 times what we're putting out of the port. It's not our CO2. It's your CO2 as Scope 3. But it's interesting how we can have some kind of influence with supply chain partners. We've taken over 8 million truck miles off the road. And we've also now increased the share of rail. Last month it was up over 33%, so it's increasing over time. Pragmatic, practical, and a choice. Please consider if rail is something that can work for your imports if you're considering that at space. We're also looking at stuff in the area towards the maritime part of the supply chain. And we've recently launched a carbon inset program, which is approximately equal to the emissions that the ships leave on by just being alongside at the berth. So they have their auxiliary motors on, or engines on, whilst they're alongside at the berth. And they're putting out about 50 kilos of CO2 per container. So the carbon inset program trial has been launched. It can have direct impact on your supply chain now by using insetting methodology. And insets are used directly or indirectly to reduce the carbon dioxide within your current Scope 3 emissions. As I said, from the 1st of January, we've got 50 kilos of CO2 is earned automatically by every import container that crosses the quay. Automatically. It's paid for by our energy transition contribution, which is already established, but it's automatic there. If you register for these, you can actually use them for your Scope 3 emission reporting. How do we create them? Well, we use, in partnership with Unifeeder, which is a group company of DP World, we are using incremental, additional, low carbon fuel for our vessels. And we are not claiming the benefit of that vessel, we are then tokenizing that and making that available for being a carbon inset. And what's quite nice about this is it's set up for container shipping in Northern Europe, which is the same type of emission which is happening on many of the containerized, or all of the containerized supply chains coming into the UK. If half of our cargo in the UK signs up for this, we will take out 10,000 tons of CO2 immediately this year in terms of lower carbon. It's very easy to participate. Go to the screenshot. We're outside as well, so I won't do the sales pitch too much. And you can register online, and you will get your certificate automatically sent to you, and we count the containers for you. How am I doing for time? We also have, we're exploring how we can be an energy hub. We have over 4,500 trucks coming into our 2 ports on a daily basis. All of those trucks are going to have to make a route to lower carbon options. And we are a potential hub to be able to provide lower carbon fuel, potentially energy as well, electric and EV solutions. And we've installed the first energy electrical points, and we're now looking to try and work with partners with this. We also provide an incentive of over £20 per container that comes in if it comes in on an electric vehicle. So we're trying to incentivize that. I want to mention our Move to -15 program that we're trying to put out there across the globe. This is a global initiative. This one's quite interesting. We have the luxury position of being able to service about 75% of all the temperature control containers coming into the UK. For frozen containers, many of them are set at -18. Well, the reason why they were set at -18 is sometime in the distant past, a century ago, the Americans set their cold stores at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which happens to be -18. But we know, because we've done quite a lot of studies with various different institutions, that so long as you're below -12, there is no degradation for the cargo involved. So if you set it to -15, that gives us a huge opportunity for efficiencies in the supply chain. If we can get this standard to -15, there's a huge dividend potentially. 17 million tons of CO2 across the global supply chain. And that's all members of the supply chain. This is not an easy thing to do. There's all kinds of contracts and things involved. But it is an opportunity for the future. And it could mean 5 to 7% of energy usage savings as well. So this is a pragmatic approach, and it's a bit of a call to action for those in that segment. So join the move to -15 and learn a little bit more. So my point here is, having a sustainable option and having an economic option, they're not two mutually exclusive things. They can happen together. These are pragmatic explorations into this space. We're framing many of them as trials. Some of the things that we do work, some of them don't work. But we're having a dialogue with our customers to try and see how we can address your Scope 3 emissions with some pragmatic choices in the supply chain today. And I'd love this is a dialogue, this is something we're learning all the time. I'd love to invite those of you who are interested we've got a workshop tomorrow where we're trying to do a few round tables about a few of these issues. Please come along, sign up. And I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion later on when we discuss this. Thank you very much for your time. Once again, John Trenchard on LinkedIn. And the challenge for everyone is, can we change what's possible? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, John. We've got time for a very quick question if there's anything from the room. I know there's plenty I would like to ask you. Do we have any immediate questions from the room? It's amazing how often people decide now's a good time just to adjust their hair, which is an outrageous dummy for me thinking there's a question. Well, I have a particular question I want to come to first, John, and that's, you said in your presentation there about being in a position of high responsibility. You know, DP World operations right in the middle of that sort of spider's web, that ecosystem, if you like. How seriously is that responsibility taken in terms of knowing your actions, all of those programs, all of those trials can make huge changes to other organizations? How is that considered within the organization? How central is that to the thinking of all of these trials to make the maximum impact?
Okay, there's lots of loading things out. With 75% market share of temperature-controlled goods coming into the UK, it is critical that we make sure that those supply chains work. If you want fresh blueberries or citrus or bananas or your meat products, they need to be there. So there's a lot of preparation, assuring that that's there, making sure that we've got the capacity, preparing for that, and ensuring safety as well, all the way through this. In terms of safety, in terms of sustainability and responsibility, DP World is not one homogeneous lump of people. You know, we have discussions about priorities, where to put capital, what we're going to do and what's going on. But I think there is a consensus coming that for us to have relevance in the supply chain as we move from a port operator to an end-to-end supply chain operator, sustainability has to be at the heart of what we do. Certainly in this market and in North America, in Canada and Europe. And that's something which we are now really trying to embrace. And I would encourage a discussion with supply chain partners, because we don't know the answers to all of them. We don't know what all the problems are even to know the answers to. But we're prepared to explore it. And I think that that's really now beginning to resonate in terms of the stuff we've done. And one thing I would say is when we first said, well, let's try and not burn dinosaurs, the reaction we got was, no, that's impossible. But we found a way of financing it, and the impossible became possible. So, you know, I think you have to be a bit tenacious, but, you know, that's where the responsibility is, because we are at the heart of the supply chains, and we are key to supply chains serving the UK.
Yes, I really do wish that was the name of the strategy, the Let's Not Burn Dinosaurs strategy. It'd be very catchy. Anyway, John, thank you so much. Be back with us very shortly. Up next, we have Tanya Jane from Amazon Freight. John will be back with us with the Scope 3 Strategy Forum in just a moment. But for now, a round of applause for John Trenchard, please.